So I wanted, before we get started, to let everyone know that I have a new podcast out, and it's called Meditations. If you like the Meditations segment of this current podcast, you'll like the Meditations podcast. It's nothing but 20 minutes of meditative sounds. And now, on with the podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
Well, the other day I was at my bank. They got signs all over there. At this bank of a friend. Last month I was 2 payments behind. My friend took away my car. I tell you, with me, nothing comes easy. Nothing, you know. Well, last week I saw my dentist. Not a beauty, my dentist. I said to him, can you put in a new tooth to match my other teeth? He put in a tooth with 4 cavities. I tell you, last week was a rough week for me, last week. I broke up my psychiatrist, too, last week. For the first time, I told him I got suicidal tendencies. He told me from now on I have to pay in advance. Well, the first time I saw a psychiatrist, I felt like 2 cents. I was a kid. I said to him, Doc, can you help me? All day long, he's thinking I'm ugly. He made me lay in a couch, face down. I tell you, when I was a kid, I got no respect. No respect at all, you know. The time I was lost on a beach, and a cop had me look for my parents. I said to the cop, I think we'll find them. He said, I don't know, kid, there's so many places I could hide. When I was a kid, my old man, he didn't help either, you know. The time I asked my old man if I can go ice skating on a lake, he told me to wait till it gets warmer. I tell you, sometimes I can't take it no more. Well, today I got 2 kids, and that's rough, too, you know. You can't talk to kids today. My boy's birthday last week. Had a little party, brought out the cake. The kid blew out all the candles. I said to him, hope your wish comes true. He said, if it does, that's the last time you'll watch me blow out candles. What a smart kid I got, you know. Like the last time I took my kid to Coney Island, I asked him if he wanted to go in a crazy house. He told me to save my money. We'll be home soon.
Good morning. It's Monday, Moral Monday, August the 25th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have Varney and Company, motivation, meditation, and moral politics. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, Varney and Company.
Stu, take it away.
Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. There is no such thing as the summer doldrums when Donald Trump is in the White House. There's always something going on, and this Monday morning is no exception. The president of South Korea is in town, and you know what that means? Trade talks. We're expecting an on-camera meeting. The president is likely to take questions. He'll make news. He's also going to sign an executive order banning no cash bail. He believes no cash bail started the crime wave in blue Democrat-run cities. He's getting rid of it. More on trade. Trump says to expect tariffs on all furniture imports. Furniture stocks like RH, Wayfair, and Williams-Sonoma, they're down. But Lazy Boy, which manufactures mostly in the States, that's moving up. The rest of the market is moving lower after Friday's big rally. Looking at futures, we see the Dow, plenty of reading, they're off about 130 points, 140 now. S&P down 19, NASDAQ is down 90 points. But there was a big rally Friday, remember that. NVIDIA reports Wednesday afternoon. This is the big one in the AI business. In advance of the numbers, the stock remains close to its all-time high That was $184 a share. It's $177 right now. Bitcoin backing off, 111,500 right now. Interest rates, I'll call them firm. The 10-year Treasury yields just above 4.25%. The 2-year coming in below 3.75. You're at 3.73 on the 2-year. On the show today, armed National Guard troops are now patrolling Washington, D.C., and the president is considering troops for other Democrat-run cities, including Chicago. In New York, socialist Zoran Mandani has opened up a double-digit lead in the polls. He's also pulled in $1 million for his campaign, half of it coming from out of state. The Democrats have opened a 3-day get-together in Minneapolis to discuss future strategy. One group is pleading with the party to end the use of far-left terms like birthing person, the unhoused, and incarcerated people. And I'll be giving you my impression of coming back to New York City after spending 2 weeks in remote, rural New Zealand. What a contrast. It is Monday, August the 25th. Labor Day is only 1 week away. Varney and Company is about to begin.
And what do you know? Stuart actually decided to show up for work. Wow. I feel blessed. Anyways, that's Varney and Company, nonprofit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the political corner.
What are the main principles of moral politics? In today's political climate, discussions around ethics and morality are more relevant than ever. Recent events have sparked debates about how moral principles shape political decisions. Many people are searching for clarity on what guides these discussions. Understanding the principles of moral politics can provide that clarity. Moral politics examines the ethical dimensions of political actions and decisions. It focuses on how moral principles influence political behavior and policymaking. Several key principles emerge at this intersection of ethics and politics. First, there is the principle of contractualism. Developed by philosophers like T.M. Scanlon, this principle suggests that moral guidelines come from what rational individuals would agree to under specific conditions. It emphasizes mutual respect and avoiding harm to others. Next is the principle of rights and liberties. In liberal democracies, protecting fundamental rights and liberties is essential. This principle ensures that individual freedoms are not subject to the whims of popular majorities. It is vital for maintaining democratic integrity. Another important principle is the tension between absolutism and relativism. Moral absolutism argues that certain principles are universally true and should apply without exception. In contrast, moral relativism holds that ethical judgments depend on cultural or personal contexts. Moral politics often navigates this complex relationship. Additionally, the concept of patriotism and community plays a role. Reasonable patriotism suggests that loyalty to one's community is necessary for maintaining stable political societies. This principle balances national identity with respect for universal moral standards. Lastly, principles of justice and fairness are central to moral politics. These principles ensure that political systems distribute benefits and burdens equitably. They strive for justifiable outcomes for all members of society. These principles illustrate the interplay between ethics and politics. They show how moral considerations inform political decision-making and governance. As discussions continue to evolve, understanding these principles can help individuals engage more meaningfully in political discourse.
And that was the political corner. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the patriotic short.
How does libertarianism impact moral politics? Have you ever wondered how a political ideology can shape our understanding of right and wrong? Today, we will look at libertarianism and its influence on moral politics. Libertarianism emphasizes individual liberty as the core value in both moral and political discussions. This means that moral rights are defined by the freedom of individuals to act without interference from others. At the heart of libertarianism is the belief that every person has the right to live freely, as long as they do not infringe on the rights of others. This principle creates a moral framework where coercion is generally seen as wrong unless it is necessary to prevent harm to others. In this view, the only acceptable limits on a person's freedom are those that respect the same rights of others. Libertarianism takes a clear stance against the idea that the government should impose collective moral goals or redistribute resources. Such actions are viewed as violations of individual freedom and property rights. Instead, libertarians advocate for a minimal government whose main job is to protect individuals from force, fraud, and theft. They believe that the government should not dictate moral outcomes or social goods. This ideology allows for a variety of moral theories to coexist. Libertarianism does not insist on one single moral foundation. It can align with both rights-based and consequentialist views. The focus remains on justice and the protection of rights rather than prescribing a complete moral code for personal behavior. Psychologically, libertarians often prioritize individual liberty over other moral principles like altruism or authority. This results in a moral perspective that tends to downplay social obligations in favor of personal autonomy and self-ownership. In practical terms, libertarianism affects moral politics in several ways. It opposes laws that enforce moral standards through coercion, such as certain drug laws and mandatory social welfare programs. Libertarians argue that these laws restrict free contracts and violate individual rights. They also advocate for the protection of private property and voluntary exchange as essential to individual freedom. Libertarianism frames justice as protecting individuals from rights violations, rather than promoting equality or social justice as primary goals. This perspective encourages political discussions to focus on the limits of government power and the justification of coercion. It emphasizes persuasion over compulsion in social and political interactions. In summary, libertarianism significantly impacts moral politics by insisting that the legitimacy of political actions relies on respecting individual rights and minimizing coercion. This shapes debates about justice, government authority, and the ethical boundaries of political power.
And that was the shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, civic virtue in moral politics.
What is the role of civic virtue in moral politics? Have you ever wondered how our actions as citizens shape the political landscape? Civic virtue plays a key role in moral politics by defining how we engage with our communities and government. It is about prioritizing the common good over personal interests. This mindset helps maintain a just political order and effective governance. At its essence, civic virtue includes habits and values that promote the welfare of society. Honesty, responsibility, and respect for laws are just a few examples. When citizens actively participate in public life, like voting, volunteering, or joining community discussions, they help build trust and cooperation. These qualities are vital for a stable democracy and ethical leadership. Historically, the idea of civic virtue has roots in ancient political philosophy. Thinkers like Aristotle highlighted the relationship between citizens and the state. Citizens should be capable of ruling and being ruled justly. During the Enlightenment, this concept evolved. Philosophers pointed out that a healthy democracy relies not just on laws but also on the moral character of its citizens. The founding fathers of the United States believed civic virtue was essential to prevent corruption and ensure the republic's longevity. In moral politics, civic virtue connects ethics and politics. It reminds us that political life is not just about power or self-interest. It is about our moral responsibility to one another. Citizens must exercise ethical judgment, engage in public service, and uphold norms that support democratic institutions. This ethical engagement is crucial for maintaining trust and social capital, which are necessary for collective decision-making. To promote civic virtue, we need to encourage education focused on moral and political responsibility. Transparency and accountability in leadership are also important. Creating opportunities for meaningful citizen participation can make a big difference. Cultivating virtues like civility, honesty, and respect for diversity supports constructive political dialogue. Civic virtue serves as the ethical foundation for moral politics. It aligns individual behavior with the needs of society, ensuring political power is exercised justly. When citizens actively contribute to the common good, they help create a stronger, more just political environment.
And that was the role of civic virtue in moral politics. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, motivation.
A lot of us have big dreams, big goals. And when you have goals that are maybe outside your reach, you have to know that getting to that goal, you're going to have a lot of bad days, a lot of setbacks. Failure is going to happen. So how fast do you get up from that? But the biggest key to success in anything you do is you got to have an unlimited supply of fire, this drive and passion that I'm going to be somebody. It has to be there because on all those bad days and all those days you don't want to do stuff, you have to be your own motivator, your own coach, your own trainer, your own everything. You have to come into work ready to go. You may have failed miserably yesterday. Be like, man, you just lost everything. How the hell are you just staying motivated? Because this is what it takes. This is what it takes.
When you decide acting in your best interest, you're going to lose some friends. Everybody's not going to approve of you. There's some people that won't like you. Who do you think you are? You're arrogant. What do you think you can do? You think you can get away with that? You're selfish.
Get away from these people that's in your life that ain't doing nothing. Get away from people in your life that's hating. Get away from them. Get away from them.
You ever heard said one spoiled apple will spoil a whole barrel? One negative person can spoil your whole life. Leave the flakes alone. People that are seriously not serious.
Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. If you have a dream, you have to protect it. When people can't do something themselves, they want to tell you you can't do it. Don't let these negative people turn you away from what you want. Just stay focused on where you want to go.
If you can just keep hope alive, you can make it. Because if you keep hoping, it is really faith. You just got to transpose it into I hope this happened to I believe this can happen. See, a lot of people have an idea or a dream and they give up on it. No, don't do that. Work your dream until it gets hard. Most things don't happen as soon as we think they should happen. Any number of things can happen to interrupt your flow. It's okay. Don't take it personal. Just acknowledge what's going on. It's called life and keep on working on your dream because this is your life. This is what you love. This is your passion. And feel within yourself that everything is going to work out for you. But you must be patient, persistent, and positive, no matter what.
When you grinding hurts. Grinding is a sacrifice. Grinding costs. When you're grinding and your body tell you hurt, you stop. When you hurt, you stop. When you feel pain, you stop. When you tired, you stop. When you disappointed, you stop. When somebody get in your ear, you stop. Some of you a boost until it's uncomfortable. You a boost when everything is going right. But sometimes stuff start happening when it's uncomfortable. You start to break. You start to bend. You start to fold. It ain't always going to be the way you like it. The conditions ain't always going to be perfect. But if you want this, if you really want this, you got to learn to sacrifice. You got to learn to give up to go up.
because skill can't get you past certain things. Agility can't get you. You gotta have mental toughness.
Now, whatever goal you have, you're going to have some difficulties. You're going to have some challenges. Long journey, long dark night. But when you hold on to your dream, don't let anybody kill it in you. When it doesn't make sense to anybody, including you sometimes, just hold on. Once you give yourself an opportunity to try and to stretch, you'll find out you can do more than you can ever begin to imagine.
And if you quit, if you falter, if you stop, all the pain will be for nothing. You don't quit on me. You man up. You woman up. You get your life back. I mean mental toughness. Be persistent. I mean get up at 3 o'clock in the morning even when you don't see results. You made a commitment to get up at 3, so you get up at 3. You do as many reps as you said you were going to do. You got to get to a point where you are locked into the process. So every day you do it on Monday. You come back and do it Tuesday. You come back and do it Wednesday. You come back and do it Thursday. You come back and do it Friday. You are persistent. You fall, you get right back up. Don't stop for a week. Don't stop for a month. Don't stop for a year. You fail a class, you go right back and take it again. Don't stop. Don't quit. Don't give up. Why? Muscle memory. You do it over and over and over. Every time you're getting better and better and better. And repetition deepens the impression in your mind. Those motor skills, you start implanting that thing. You do it over and over and over and over and over again. You start implanting stuff and then boom, memory kicks in. And you come up against that thing. You gotta outdo that thing. And you can't do it when you get there. You gotta already make up your mind before you get to that exam and pass that exam. You gotta make up in your mind when you talk to that singer. You gotta look at it before you even get to it. So don't you ever give up. As long as you got breath in your nostrils, don't you ever give up. Don't you ever give in, because I never told you it would be easy. But with mental toughness, you can get it done.
And that was motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is a little clip of Karen Bass from back in January when she's getting back from Africa after the fires in Los Angeles have raged through, and the news people are asking her questions, which she is refusing to answer. So,
owe citizens an apology for being absent while their homes were burning? Do you regret cutting the fire department budget by millions of dollars, Madam Mayor? Have you nothing to say today?
She's gotten away with
there we go. So the reason she can get away with not answering, because you think, well, she's not answering. She's a public official. She has to answer, right? That's what the media is always saying. Wow, you must answer. Don't the American people have the right to know? Which would have been a nice question to follow-up question here. Hey, don't the people of Los Angeles have the right to know what's going on? But the reason it didn't work is because he's approaching this from a property standpoint. She's a communist. She doesn't give a rat's ass about property. Neither does her supporters. Neither do her supporters. And neither does the Los Angeles Times. Okay, that's the only paper or news source that she gives a hoot about, is the Los Angeles Times. So if you want to get the Los Angeles Times to get on board here, you have to start asking questions that the left cares about. You got to think like the left. So the perfect question to ask her at that point was, do you have any regrets about pumping millions and millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere after having campaigned on campaigned against climate change? She has to answer that question. She can't let that go. She knows it because her supporters are interested in it, and the Los Angeles Times will be interested in it. Okay, so she can't blow that off. So, and there might be other, what else can, money. The money that is wasted, the money that has been wasted in your administration, couldn't it have been better used for single-payer health care? Again, that's another one of the left's issues. But primarily, I think the one that would have gotten her talking is the carbon dioxide. Because that's supposed to be, there's so much urgency. We're all going to be dead by 2035 if you listen to the left. So that's the thing that people like John Cobelt, he does it all the time. He preaches to the choir, the First Church of John Cobelt. Right? It never occurs to him to talk to the Democrats. Okay? And if he would be a major, major influence in California politics. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, ethical dilemmas.
What ethical dilemmas arise in public policy decisions? When we think about public policy decisions, we often overlook the ethical dilemmas that come into play. These dilemmas emerge at the crossroads of ethics and politics, where different values and responsibilities collide. Let's break down some of the key ethical challenges that policymakers face. One major dilemma is balancing transparency and privacy. Policymakers must decide how much information to share with the public. While transparency builds trust, too much openness can compromise personal privacy or national security. Finding that sweet spot is no easy task. Another challenge is the tension between accountability and political influence. Public officials often feel pressure from political parties or donors. This can conflict with their duty to serve the public fairly. When campaign promises come into play, it raises questions about whose interests are truly being served. Conflicts of interest also present ethical challenges. Policymakers may find themselves in situations where their personal or financial interests clash with their official duties. They must decide whether to disclose these conflicts or step back from decisions to maintain their integrity. Allocating scarce resources is another ethical dilemma. Policymakers often have to distribute limited resources among competing needs. Ensuring fairness and equity while maximizing social benefit can be tricky, especially when vulnerable groups are involved. Then there are policies that pit individual rights against the common good. For example, mandatory vaccinations or quarantine measures can create tensions between personal freedoms and public health. Deciding when to limit individual rights for the greater good involves complex ethical considerations. Corruption and misuse of power are significant ethical concerns as well. When public officials engage in unethical behavior, it erodes trust and diverts resources. Maintaining ethical governance requires strong accountability measures and ethical leadership. Public administrators may also face dilemmas when enforcing laws that conflict with their personal beliefs. Balancing professional responsibilities with personal conscience can be challenging. They often need to uphold public interest while seeking change through appropriate channels. Managing public expectations is another ethical hurdle. Policymakers must communicate honestly about what policies can achieve. Misleading information or empty promises can damage public trust. Ethical communication is about educating the public on complex issues without resorting to political spin. Addressing these dilemmas requires practical steps. Establishing clear ethical guidelines and transparent decision-making processes is essential. Mechanisms for accountability, like audits and citizen feedback, help ensure ethical governance. Encouraging the disclosure of conflicts of interest and engaging stakeholders can promote fairness. Balancing competing values thoughtfully is vital, as is maintaining independence from undue pressures. At the intersection of ethics and politics, public policy decisions are complex. Ethical dilemmas arise not just from the goals of policies but also from how decisions are made and who influences them. Recognizing and addressing these dilemmas is key to building public trust and ensuring just governance.
And that was Ethical Dilemmas. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now Maria Bartiromo, this is her, Sunday Morning Futures with Maria. And she's going to be talking to a central banker, but it's the way she introduces this interview that's interesting.
Trump has been urging for the past several months. This market is up 10% on the S&P 500 during Donald Trump's term. From the beginning of the year, second time around, I caught up with the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde, at the Central Bank Symposium in Jackson Hole, Wyoming this weekend. And I asked her why she's been cutting rates at least 8 times by 200 basis points in the last 16 months, even as Jay Powell has declined to do so. Lagarde walked me through her reasoning for cutting rates while also assessing the global economy, including stiff regulation in Europe and why it can't seem to create the trillion-dollar companies that America has created, and a lot more. But I began with the war on Russia and Ukraine and what Europe can do to stop Vladimir Putin. I want to get your take on the impact on Europe because the European Union and Western governments are overseeing this $300 billion in Russian assets sitting in Europe right now. Now, I know that the EU has said that the interest on that money and the profits from that money can be used to rebuild Ukraine. But what can you do as the president of the ECB in terms of stopping Putin from attacking Ukraine? Can you demand that $300 billion in Russian money does not get back to Putin, and you use that to rebuild Ukraine.
The Europeans, as you know, are financing a lot of the support.
Okay, so I wanted to just get at least that much in, but the interesting point here is that she introduces this lady, and then when she's talking to her, makes the same mistake, and she fails to make the point of, number one, is she with a particular political party? She has to be. It's a political position, central banker of European Union. Then, where on the political spectrum does she fall? Is she a liberal or is she a conservative? I rather doubt that she's a conservative, being that she's European. There just isn't a whole lot of conservatives in Europe. So more than likely she's a lefty. And by omitting this information, again, we go back to this quasi-neutrality or transparency situation where she's just a figurehead, a person and a title, and it becomes the whole interview is gossipy and like a soap opera. It has no real reality to it. It has no. It's not interesting. Maria Bartiromo needs to call. It's not even calling them out. Just identify them. Find out ahead of time. Hey, lady, where are you on the political spectrum? Are you a liberal? Are you with what particular political party are you associated with? And then introduce her as such. That gives us all the information we need, because how she thinks politically shapes her decisions in terms of the central bank. It's the same thing with Powell. Everybody calls him Powell. Powell. Is he a liberal Powell or conservative Powell? Okay, that explains a lot. Is he a Trump lover or is he a Trump hater? That's another thing that would go a long way to explaining why he does what he does. But nobody does that. Maria Bartiromo, nobody that interviews these people will bother to get to completely introduce them. She had a interview with a Republican House member named Byron Scott. She wouldn't even introduce him as a Republican. She just says, House member Byron Scott. She introduced him that way, and at the end she said, thank you, Mr. Congressman Byron Scott. Not Republican, okay? And this is absolutely essential. You got to know where they stand on the political spectrum in order to get the full picture of who they are, what they do, and what they're likely to do. And so what this is journalistic malfeasance. It is incompetent on Maria Bartiromo's part. Non-profit news now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Moral Politics by Dr. Lakoff.
Chapter 14. Two models of Christianity. There are those who claim that their politics is simply a matter of following what the Bible literally says. This assumes that there is such a thing as a literal interpretation of the Bible. Indeed, whole branches of Christianity are based on such a claim, but it is straightforwardly a false claim. Nobody believes that "the Lord is my shepherd" is said literally by a sheep that has fleece and eats grass. Nobody believes that "Our Father who art in heaven" is literally Daddy. Virtually every page of the Bible is filled with passages that can only be, and always are, interpreted metaphorically. There simply is no fully literal interpretation of the Bible. There is nothing surprising about this or wrong with it. Literal modes of thought and literal language are simply not adequate for characterizing God and the relation of human beings to God. Such things can be understood only through metaphorical thought and communicated through metaphorical language. God, after all, is ineffable, beyond human comprehension. If you're going to even think or talk about God, you're going to have to use human experience as your basis and have an extensive collection of metaphors at your disposal. My colleague, Professor Eve Sweetser, has been studying metaphors for God in the Judeo-Christian tradition. She began, somewhat arbitrarily, by looking at the Judaic tradition, at the metaphors in the Yom Kippur liturgy, at a point where a list is given. The list is a good starting point. It provides a representative collection of Judeo-Christian metaphors for God, since many of the Christian metaphors were inherited from the Jewish tradition. Here is the list. God is a father. Humans, or specifically Jews, are his children. God is a king. Human beings are his subjects. God is a male lover. Humanity, or the Jewish people, is his female lover. God is a shepherd. Humans are his flock of sheep. God is a vineyard keeper. Humans are his vineyard. God is a watchman. Humans are the treasure he guards. God is a potter. Humans are his clay. God is a glass blower. Humans are his glass. God is a smith. Humans are his metal. God is a helmsman. Humans are the rudder, or ship. God has chosen us. We have chosen God. As Sweetser, in a work in preparation, points out, this collection of metaphors for God forms a radial category, with God as Father at the center. The God as Father metaphor is the only metaphor that overlaps in one way or another with each of the other metaphors. The Father and King metaphors both attribute authority to God. The Father and Lover metaphors both attribute nurturance to God and posit mutual love between God and human beings. The Father, King, Shepherd, and Watchman metaphors all attribute protectiveness to God. The Father, Vineyard Keeper, Potter, Glass Blower, and Smith metaphors all attribute to God a casual ontological relationship, bringing people into being. The Father, Lover, and Choice metaphors all see the relationship as between two volitional beings. These metaphors are not to be seen as operating simultaneously. For example, God is not to be seen as a father who is also a male lover. That would make the relationship incestuous, and it is certainly not intended to be that. The metaphors, though overlapping in the understanding of God that each posits, are not to be seen as holding all at once. This collection of metaphors for God should give some sense of the richness of metaphorical thought in religion. Since the Bible cannot be understood literally, it must be interpreted. Different denominations of Judaism and Christianity accept different interpretations of the Bible. Each denomination, of course, accepting only its own interpretation. It should be clear, then, that the claims of certain Christians that their politics is just a matter of following what is literally in the Bible must be false, though I do not doubt their sincerity in believing that claim. This raises important questions. What makes conservative Christians conservative? What makes liberal Christians liberal? Christianity in itself takes many political forms, from the Conservative Christian Coalition to the Liberal Interfaith Alliance, the National Council of Churches, and even liberal theology in Latin America and elsewhere. There are over 400 Protestant denominations, and it appears that a majority are liberal and a well-organized minority are conservative. What makes conservative Christians conservative? My guess is what makes conservative Christians conservative is that they interpret their religion as requiring a strict father model of the family and strict father morality. The God as Father metaphor attributes to God both authority and nurturance, but there are various possibilities for how authority and nurturance can go together. In the nurturant parent model, the child's obedience to the parent's authority is a consequence of the parent's proper nurturance. In the strict father model, the reverse is true. Authority comes first. First and foremost, the child must obey and not challenge the strict father's authority. To the obedient child, nurturance then comes as a proper reward. See references B3, Dobson, 1992, pages 20 through 22. One's relation to God can be interpreted in either way. On the nurturant parent interpretation, you accept God's authority because of his original and continuing nurturance. On the strict father interpretation, God is seen as setting the rules and demanding authority. If you obey, you get nurturance. The difference is one of priorities, and as we have seen, that is an all-important difference. To place that difference in perspective, I will have to give a schematic account of certain aspects of conservative Christianity, using the metaphor system discussed throughout this work. To do this without anything extraneous clouding the picture, I will have to give the barest of bare skeletons of the religion. I ask your indulgence for my oversimplification, which will of necessity sound like the text of a comic book called Christ for Beginners. I, of course, assume that there are a great many variations on this model, just as there are variations on strict father morality and conservative politics. See Chapter 17. Moreover, I realize that one could have a nurturant parent model of the family and a strict father model of religion, or the converse. What I am describing here are the maximally coherent, ideologically pure positions. Christianity in general associates the nurturant aspect of God with Christ. Christianity works by a moral accounting system inherited from Judaism. Immoral deeds are debits, moral deeds are credits. By moral arithmetic, see Chapter 4, receiving something of negative value, say suffering, is equivalent to giving away something of positive value, as in paying for something. Suffering is thus a way of paying for your sins. Suffering builds up moral credit, just as doing good does. If you have a big enough positive balance of moral credit when you die, you go to heaven. If you have a negative balance, you go to hell. These general notions are shared by most forms of Christianity. At this point, let's look specifically at strict father Christianity. Strict father Christianity. Being made of flesh, human beings are morally weak. This inherent moral weakness is called original sin, as exemplified by the moral weakness of Adam and Eve, which resulted in God's taking everlasting life away from human beings. Because of their moral weakness, everybody starts off with a large moral debit, big enough to guarantee that ordinary people would go to hell. But God loved human beings so much, he wanted to offer them a way out of this horrible fate, which arose from their inherently sinful bodily nature. So he made his only son a human being who was free of sin, and hence had no moral debits. Then God allowed his son to be crucified, and in so doing had him suffer more than the total possible suffering of all mankind forever. Through all this suffering, Jesus built up a huge amount of moral credit, much more than enough to pay for the original sin of all mankind. Through his crucifixion, Jesus paid off mankind's original sin debit. This made it possible for human beings to go to heaven if they were righteous enough. But there were those human beings who, over the course of their lives, had sinned so much and run up such a moral debit that they were destined for hell no matter what they did for the rest of their lives. But Jesus loved all people so much, including those sinners, that he suffered on the cross enough to pay off their moral debts too. This was an enormous act of love, but not unconditional love. There had to be a condition. It would have been wrong to let wrongdoers get into heaven without doing anything at all to get there. That would have undone the whole point of the moral accounting system, which is to get people to follow God's commandments. So Jesus offered sinners a deal. If they would truly repent, accept him as their Lord, join his church, and follow his teachings for the rest of their lives, he would pay off their moral debts with the moral credit from his crucifixion and wipe their slate clean. It would be as if they were born again, with no moral debits. That way he would save them from hell. He would be their savior. The contract was made available to all sinners at any time. As their part of the deal, the former sinners would have to accept the authority of God and follow his commandments for the rest of their lives. This would be hard. It would require a character one did not have before being born again, a new moral essence, not being rotten to the core, but being rock solid. To acquire this moral essence, you have to take Jesus into your heart. The heart is the metaphorical locus of moral essence. You have to take the essence of Jesus into you and make it your essence. That is not as easy as it may sound. It requires building up moral strength through self-discipline and self-denial. It requires obeying moral authority, the moral authority of God, as revealed through the Bible and His Church. It requires staying within moral boundaries and not deviating from the path of righteousness. And it requires remaining pure and upright. Jesus' offer was one of love, not unconditional love, but tough love. Unfortunately, there is a large loophole in this contract. Allowing people to repent at any time and still go to heaven is an incentive to keep sinning as long as possible. Then, at the last minute, you can repent and go to heaven. That's not an incentive to be good. It makes sinning pay off up until you're about to die. This loophole is closed by the last judgment. The idea that, at some time which human beings cannot predict, the world will come to an end and the moral books will be closed. At that instant, you will be judged. And if you are a sinner, if you have more debits than credits at that instant, you will be forever damned to hell. Because the last judgment could happen at any time, the only way to guarantee that you will be able to take advantage of the deal Jesus has offered is to accept it immediately. If you truly repent now, you guarantee yourself a spot in heaven. On Judgment Day, Jesus will be your Redeemer. He will pay off your old moral debts and redeem you from the clutches of the devil. Properties of the strict father interpretation of Christianity. What makes this biblical interpretation a strict father interpretation is the centrality of God's authority. His strict commandments, the requirement of obedience, the priority of moral strength, the need for self-discipline and self-denial, and the enforcement through reward and punishment. What makes this system work is reward and punishment based on moral accounting. Reward for following and punishment for not following the authority of God. Without it, the entire moral system makes no sense. Without the reward of heaven, people will not follow God's commandments and all morality will break down. An offer of redemption without making you work for it would be like welfare. It would be an incentive to be immoral. It is this religious system of reward and punishment that James Dobson, in the quotation above, claimed, through metaphor, to be the same as laissez-faire free market capitalism. What conservative Christians have done is two things. They have given the Bible an interpretation in terms of strict father morality, and they have, through metaphor, linked that interpretation of the Bible with conservative politics. The Bible can, of course, be interpreted in many ways, and the wildly different denominations of Jews and Christians testify to that. For example, when a sinner accepts Christ as his Savior, he could see himself as appreciating Christ's, and hence God's, nurturance, and thereafter taking Christ as his model for nurturant behavior. The former sinner would thereafter adopt a nurturant parent morality. If, in interpreting the Bible, one gives priority to God's compassion and nurturance rather than to his authority, then one's religious morality will tend to be nurturant parent morality, and the application of that morality to political life would tend to make one a liberal. We will discuss such an interpretation shortly. It is important to understand just why conservative Christians are conservative, and to realize that their interpretation of the Bible gives them no special claim to morality. Indeed, in this case, family-based morality precedes morality based on religion, since it is strict father morality that yields this interpretation of the Bible. Conservative Christians are not conservative because they interpret the Bible, all of it, purely literally. There may be parts certain denominations do take literally, such as that God created the world in exactly 168 hours. But in many of the most important respects, conservative Christians have a metaphorical interpretation of the Bible, just like everyone else. What makes them conservative is the same thing that makes them the kinds of Christians they are, the use of strict father morality. Indeed, that's what makes conservative Christians try to interpret the Bible literally, If the Bible as the Word of God contains commandments from the highest moral authority, commandments which are to be followed absolutely and strictly, then someone seeking to strictly obey those commandments is committed to having no personal subjective interpretations. He would not be following God's commandments if they were only his interpretations of God's commandments. But as we have seen, this is a self-defeating enterprise. Purely literal interpretation of the Bible is impossible, even in its most important respects: the understanding of God, one's relationship to him, and the overall understanding of the conservative Christian tradition. In conservative Christianity, all these require an interpretation, a strict father interpretation. But conservative Christians go beyond applying strict father morality just to religion. They apply it to politics as well, forging a metaphorical link between 1. Their religious system of moral accounting, 2. Laissez-faire free market economics, and 3. The strict father morality system of reward and punishment. What makes conservative Christians conservative is this system of metaphor: God as Father, well-being as wealth, and moral accounting, morality as strength, morality as obedience, moral self-interest, and so on. The morality of reward and punishment, for example, assumes the metaphor of moral accounting, and would make no sense without it. In conservative Christianity, laissez-faire free market capitalism is a moral, not just an economic enterprise. Why? What makes it moral, not just economic? After all, the economics just say that if each person individually pursues his own financial profit, the financial profit of all will be maximized. To make this a thesis about morality, you have to conceptually project financial profit onto moral profit. The metaphor by which this is done is well-being as wealth. Only then do we get a moral thesis, which I have called moral self-interest. If each person individually pursues his own self-interest, then the self-interest of all will be maximized. Interestingly enough, the economic theory is itself based on a metaphor, Adam Smith's metaphor of the invisible hand. The invisible hand metaphor makes use of the notion of force and the very general metaphor that control is the exercise of force by the hand. As in expressions like, "It's in your hands now. They handed him over to the FBI. It's out of my hands. I can't handle this project. You're in good hands with Allstate," and so on. The metaphor posits invisible economic forces that control the operation of a free market. In this theory, economic forces are understood metaphorically in terms of physical forces. The link in conservative Christianity between laissez-faire free market capitalism and morality is thus metaphorical through and through, as is the interpretation of the Bible via strict father morality, and strict father morality itself is metaphorical through and through. To say this is not to deconstruct and question the validity of strict father morality in conservative Christianity. It is merely to apply an analysis of the concepts involved to enterprises of biblical interpretation. I cannot repeat often enough that there is nothing wrong with metaphorical thought in itself. No one can think or function without it. Can you be a born-again Christian and not a conservative? Of course you can. First, you could have a nurturant parent interpretation of the Bible. Second, if you have a strict father interpretation, you need not use the nation as family metaphor to project strict father morality onto the political domain. That is, you could keep your religion private. Third, you need not use the metaphorical link between the Christian system of moral accounting and laissez-faire free market economics. Conservatism and born-again Christianity are distinct systems of thought. Conservative Christianity links them together by metaphor. That link need not exist. It is a matter of interpretation. Christ is the bearer of God's nurturance to human beings. God's grace is nurturance. Moral action is nurturant action. Helping through feeling empathy, demonstrating compassion, acting out of love, etc. Immoral action, sin, is non-nurturant action toward others, harming through lack of empathy, lack of compassionate action, etc. God's grace is the central notion in this interpretation, and it is understood metaphorically as nurturance. Since nurturance is a rich concept, the grace as nurturance metaphor leads to a correspondingly rich notion of grace. Here are some of the basic properties of nurturance. Properties of nurturance. Nurturance is the expression of a parent's love. Nurturance entails the presence of the parent. Nurturance entails the closeness of the parent. Nurturance involves feeding that allows for growth. Nurturance involves healing. Nurturance results in happiness. Nurturance entails protection. Nurturance is not earned. A nurturant parent gives nurturance freely and unconditionally. Nurturance must be accepted if a child is to receive the benefits of nurturance. Only through receiving nurturance do children learn to be nurturant to others, to feel love, feel empathy, act for the benefit of others, and so on. To learn to act nurturantly toward others, one must be nurtured by a nurturant parent. The grace as nurturance metaphor projects these aspects of nurturance onto corresponding properties of grace. The result is a metaphorically rich notion of grace. Properties of grace. God's grace is the expression of God's love. God's grace entails the presence of God. God's grace entails the closeness of God. God's grace involves a spiritual feeding or filling that allows for moral growth. God's grace heals spiritual wounds and spiritual ills. God's grace results in happiness. God's grace entails God's protection. Grace is not earned. God gives his grace freely and unconditionally. God's grace must be accepted if one is to receive the benefits of grace. Only through receiving God's grace do people learn to act morally toward others, to feel love, feel empathy, act for the benefit of others, and so on. To learn to act morally toward others, one must receive God's grace. Example, one must be in God's presence, be close to God, etc. Since grace is understood metaphorically as nurturance, it is of course the central concept in nurturant parent Christianity. The central need in this version of Christianity is the need for God's grace, his nurturance along with his presence and closeness. If one is to learn to act morally, and if one is to be spiritually filled, sustained, and healed. What gives rise to this need is a separation from God, a separation that is natural to the human condition. Original sin in the nurturant parent interpretation is rather different than in the strict father interpretation, as is sin itself. Sin is non-nurturant action toward others. The idea behind original sin is that we naturally act non-nurturantly toward others, and we must learn to act nurturantly. The way we learn to act nurturantly, that is, morally, is through being nurtured and then imitating the actions of those who nurture us, thus incorporating the capacity for nurturing into ourselves. But our own parents are never perfect nurturers, and may be very imperfect ones. Moreover, since we naturally start separating ourselves from them at an early age, in toddlerhood, we can never receive full and constant nurturance from our parents. The very best of nurturant parents cannot come close to making us perfect nurturers, that is, fully moral beings. Original sin, then, is our inherent inability to be fully moral, that is, nurturant beings for these reasons. It is also the state of being born and raised separate from God, the ultimate nurturant parent. The task of becoming a fully nurturant person is thus to find God, the ultimate nurturant parent, and receive his perfect continuing nurturance, his grace. On the nurturant parent interpretation of the Bible, Eden is the state of being completely loved and nurtured in early infancy. Eating of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is reaching the stage at which we begin to separate from our parents, follow our own desires, and have to learn to act morally toward others. The expulsion from Eden is reaching the stage at which we no longer are completely loved and nurtured, as in infancy, and have to face the difficulties of the world and learn to act morally. Thus, we are faced with the problem of finding God and, through his grace, growing morally and becoming as fully nurturant as we can be. Let us now turn to how Christ fits into this picture. I begin with the general notion of moral accounting, as it applies to both the nurturant parent and strict father models. Moral accounting. The moral accounting metaphor works as follows. Acting immorally gives one a moral debit. Acting morally gives one moral credit. Suffering, by moral arithmetic, gives one moral credit. If one's credits exceed one's debits at death, one goes to heaven. If one's debits exceed one's credits at death, one goes to hell. Heaven is the state of receiving perpetual nurturance from God, being in God's presence, being close to God, being filled with His love and warmth, being blissfully happy. Hell is the state of never again receiving nurturance from God, being alienated from His presence, being unloved, uncared for, unhappy. Because of original sin, people inevitably act immorally and run up huge moral debits, so huge they can never pay them off with good deeds. On the basis of our own actions alone, therefore, all human beings deserve to go to hell, to suffer alienation from God and His nurturance in perpetuity. But God, being a nurturant and loving parent, did not want His children to have to suffer forever. He wanted to give them a chance to go to heaven, to be with Him forever, and be nurtured forever. But since human beings had earned eternal damnation, their moral debts had to be paid off for them to have a chance to enter heaven. They would have to grow morally and learn to act nurturantly toward others. The only way they could do this would be through example, through the example of a perfectly nurturant human being. Even so, human beings could never do enough good deeds to pay off their moral debts. Those debts could only be paid off through human suffering. Since God, being God, could not teach human beings nurturance through human example, and since He, not being human, could not suffer human afflictions to pay off the moral debt of human beings, another solution was required. God sired a human son, Christ, who could do these things for the sake of saving human beings from hell. Christ, being the Son of God, was without sin. That is, He acted with complete nurturance, with empathy toward others, and for the benefit, development, and happiness of others, requiring nothing in return. Through His actions, He set an example of a perfectly nurturant person for human beings to follow, so that they could learn to become nurturant toward others. Christ, being perfectly nurturant, made the ultimate sacrifice for human beings. On the cross, Christ suffered so much that His suffering more than balanced the sins of the entire human race. Through His suffering, He acquired enough moral credit to pay off the moral debts of all human beings. Christ thus delivered God's nurturance to human beings. That is, He offered us God's grace. Through accepting Christ and following His example of nurturance, we can grow morally, gradually incorporating His nurturance into ourselves and becoming nurturant beings. In those denominations of Christianity where communion is of great importance, communicants are brought at communion into God's presence. They are offered God's grace and accept it. In eating the wafer and drinking the wine that is symbolic of Christ's body and blood, they are incorporating the essence of Christ, nurturance, into themselves, and hence changing their own essence to become increasingly nurturant. In accepting Christ, in following His nurturant example, one is accepting God's grace. Christ, being the ultimate nurturer, offers grace to all. Those who accept, those who take Christ into their hearts, that is, who take nurturance as the essence of their being, have their moral debts paid off with Christ's moral credit. They are redeemed, and thus are saved from hell, and can earn their way into heaven through their subsequent nurturant behavior. Comparison. The nurturant parent interpretation of Christianity has very different consequences than the strict father model. First, it presents a completely different view of the proper relationship between human beings and God. In strict parent Christianity, God is a moral authority. and the role of human beings is to obey his strict commandments. The way you learn to obey is by being punished for not obeying, and by developing the self-discipline to obey through self-denial. In nurturant parent Christianity, God is a nurturer, and the proper relationship to God is to accept his nurturance, grace, and follow Christ's example of how to act nurturantly to others. There are no strict rules. Rather, one must develop empathy and learn to act compassionately for the benefit of others, whatever that might require. You learn to become nurturant through receiving nurturance, through accepting the pleasures of nurturance, developing, growing, and following the example of the ultimate nurturer, Christ. The two forms of Christianity assume very different views of human nature. Strict father Christianity assumes folk behaviorism, that people function to get rewards and avoid punishments, and that discipline and denial build character. Nurturant parent Christianity, on the other hand, does not assume folk behaviorism nor the need for discipline and denial to build character. Instead, it assumes that being nurtured builds the right kind of character, nurturant character, and that those who are nurtured will thereby incorporate nurturant instincts into them. The two forms of Christianity assume different ideas of what a good person is. Strict father Christianity assumes that a good person is one who is self-disciplined and self-reliant, and who can function well in a hierarchy. Someone who can obey strict orders from those above and give strict orders to those below, and enforce those orders with pain. Nurturant parent Christianity sees a good person as one who is nurturant, one who can function well in interdependent situations, where social ties, communication, cooperation, kindness, and trust are essential. Finally, the two forms of Christianity have very different understandings of what the world should be like, so that such ideal persons can be produced. Strict father Christianity requires that the world be competitive and survival difficult if the right kind of people, strong people, are to be produced and rewarded. Nurturant parent Christianity requires that the world be as interdependent, nurturant, and benign as possible. If the right kind of people, nurturant people, are to be produced. In short, these two models of Christianity directly reflect the social values of the models of the family on which they are based. What this comparison shows is that there is no neutral Christianity. One can have a strict father interpretation or a nurturant parent interpretation, or many variants on these, and no doubt many other interpretations. In giving an interpretation of the Bible, one has a choice as to which passages to pay most attention to, or give most weight to, and which passages to ignore or give less weight to. Thus, one cannot just point to the Bible and say that it, in itself, gives one or the other interpretation. Nor does the Bible in itself prefer one or the other moral system or family model. Instead, family models are imposed on the Bible in providing interpretations. Thus, conservative Christians have a conservative interpretation of the Bible because they apply the same strict father-family model to their Christianity as they do to their politics. Similarly, liberal Christians have a liberal interpretation of the Bible because they, correspondingly, apply the same nurturant parent-family model to their Christianity as to their politics. Summary. There is no such thing as a literal interpretation of the Bible. Though there are both conservative and liberal Christians who choose passages to interpret as literally as possible and who claim to have a literal interpretation. Nonetheless, all interpretations are metaphorical. Strict father and nurturant parent interpretations give rise to conservative and liberal forms of Christianity. The Bible, in itself and without interpretation, can say nothing at all about the kinds of politics that one should have. It is only through strict father and nurturant parent interpretations of the Bible that one is led to a conservative or liberal religious politics. Variations and mixed views do, of course, occur. The account given here is intended only to cover the central cases.
And that was Chapter 14 of Moral Politics, How Liberals and Conservatives Think by Dr. George Lakoff. And it looks that this is all reductionist. that everything politics and religion reduced down to parenting and two different parenting models. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, what is reductionism?
What is reductionism? Broadly construed, reductionism is an approach to understanding the nature of complex things by reducing them to the interactions of their parts, or to simpler or more fundamental things. It can also be described as the philosophical position that a complex system is nothing but the sum of its parts, and that an account of it can be reduced to accounts of individual constituents. Thus, it is the belief that everything that exists is made from a small number of basic substances that behave in regular ways, and is, therefore, in some respects comparable to atomism. The idea of reductionism was first introduced by René Descartes in Part 5 of his Discourses on the Method of 1637, where he argued that the world was like a machine, its pieces like clockwork mechanisms, and that the machine could be understood by taking its pieces apart, studying them, and then putting them back together to see the larger picture. It is important to note that reductionist thinking and methods are the basis for many of the well-developed areas of modern science, including much of physics, chemistry, and cell biology. However, while it is commonly accepted that, for example, most aspects of chemistry are based on physics, it is less clear that sociology or economics is based on psychology, as some reductionists would claim. In linguistics, reductionism is the idea that everything can be described in a language with a limited number of core concepts, and combinations of those concepts. Scholars categorize reductionism into three, namely, token ontological reductionism, type ontological reductionism, and epistemological reductionism. Token ontological reductionism is the idea that every item that exists is a sum item, and that every perceivable item is a sum of items at a lower level of complexity. Type ontological reductionism is the idea that every type of item is a sum type of item, and that every perceivable type of item is a sum of types of items at a lower level of complexity. And lastly, epistemological reductionism is the theory that a complex system can be explained by reduction to its fundamental parts. It holds that all phenomena can be completely understood in terms of the behavior of microphysical entities.
And that was what is reductionism? And the reductionism I'm talking about in regards to moral politics is epistemological reductionism, or and also linguistic reductionism. Back in a minute. Thank you. And this is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that feminism is power for men.